Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Apologies to begin with for the late start. We had a bit of a mix-up because of a change in the venue. My name is Caelainn Barr, and I'm the editor of the data projects team at The Guardian in London.
My name is Karrie, and I am data journalist at the investigations unit in RTE, which is Irish National Broadcaster.
So today we're going to talk about two programming languages. But really, it's kind of a proxy for us to talk about how we learned how to code, the pros and cons with each.
Yeah.
And I guess what the experience is, and kind of if you want to learn how to code, the considerations you should take into account before you embark on learning a language.
So we sort of wrote 10 reasons that we each loved our own language. I love Python.
I'm an R person. I'm an R coder.
And I actually haven't seen Keelainn's the ones that she loves. So this is actually going to be a bit surprising. And I'm wondering how much there's going to be an overlap as well.
Yeah, I think there will be quite a bit of overlap.
Okay, all right.
So we'll go through it. Can we get the slides? Grazie.
Ah, okay. Thank you.
We just needed you to come closer.
Yeah, thank you. Magic touch.
It's a bit stretched, but you can read it.
Yeah.
So really, I think talking about the practicalities of learning how to code is, it kind of encapsulates a lot of the problems and a lot of the considerations when you're setting out to learn a language.
And the first thing as well to say from the offset is that neither of us are developers. We're both journalists.
So I very often feel like a bit of a fraud when I talk about coding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you feel like that too?
Completely, yeah. I mean, I'm out of my depth most of the time, but it's just like chipping away.
Yeah, chipping away and making it work.
Yeah.
My background is I did an undergraduate degree in philosophy and English. And then I came to journalism through the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in London, where I worked with Cynthia Murku, who works at the Financial Times. And she was a data journalist and an investigative journalist, and she still works at the FT and does fantastic journalism. She gave me my first taste of data journalism, and through that I really kind of caught the bug. So it started out with Excel, which most kind of data journalists tend to work in to begin with. And then I realized that it wasn't really going to satisfy all of my needs for the bigger data sets that I needed to work with. And that's when I came to R. And the process since then has been, I've been on and off with R for a couple of years, but now it's my go-to language.
Okay. So I also started off in humanities. I'm actually a medievalist by training. And back in 2011, when the Iraq war logs kind of hit, I saw this amazing project from The Guardian, and I was like, this is what I want to do with my life. So I moved to London, and I started at the Centre for Investigative Journalism there, moved on to the Reuters Foundation, and when I was there was a runner-up for a Pulitzer by the Reuters data team. Was this incredible project where they went and they had a look at children, adopted children, who were being essentially trafficked around the US. And I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to be able to work on projects this scale. So I talked to the team, and they were like, you got to learn how to code. So that's where I kind of started. Yeah.
So the practicalities for me are really about having a project. If you have a project that you can apply the language to, you've got a problem to solve. And you will, by hook or by crook, you will find a way of doing it, right? You've got a story you have to tell. You've got a bit of code under your belt, and you will find a way of doing it. That's been my experience.
Yeah, you have a task, you need to complete the task. How are you going to do this? Yeah. Take it slow.
Yeah. Okay, so just kind of getting into the reasons why we love our own languages, I guess. For me, I love R to begin with because it's free. And that is a massive bonus. So many newsrooms are under financial pressure. And the difficulty of learning a language to begin with, a language that you might not be very comfortable in, but you know that you need the software, you need the tools to be able to develop to begin with, but you can't prove the worth yet. Having a tool at the outset that's free is huge. R can work with lots of proprietary data types. So when I say proprietary data types, I mean things like data that would work in SAS or data that would work in SPSS. And those are databases that if you don't work in academia, where a lot of these programs are used on a daily basis, in a newsroom you would have to buy them in and they would cost thousands. Or you can find all of that data from academics or from statistical agencies. The statistical agency in the UK, which is the ONS, has a lot of stuff in SPSS. You can take that data, transform it in R, and start working with it, or output a smaller piece of what you need into an Excel spreadsheet and start your analysis. So having it to be free to begin with gives you the confidence to kind of start learning with an open source tool. And there are pros and cons to that, but for me, that is one of the massive bonuses.
Yeah.
It's free.
So I love Python because it's easy to read. When I first started this process of learning how to code, I kind of looked at a couple of different languages, and I just found that the syntax was really cryptic and it was difficult. And Python it's a pretty new language. It was created in 1995 by this Dutch genius called Guido van Rosen, and he designed it for it to be easy to read and understood. So if I go and I have a look at someone else's script, I find it easier to understand it, and then I'm up and running better. So there's far more English terms, English language in there.
We're a bit guilty of that in the R camp.
Yeah.
R is not the easiest to read, I'll
Yeah.
take that.
When I'm tired, I just need to be able to understand this. Yeah.
Yeah, R is not the easiest to learn with syntax and with the language to begin with. So
Okay.
yeah, that definitely detracts from
Yeah.
my language. Another reason to love R, though, is that it has an amazing, really usable interface.
That is true.
Which is called RStudio, which is also free. Unless you're a very large organization, you can use RStudio for free. And basically, rather than using a coding interface where you're just inputting code and getting the output, it has multiple panels where you can see your files, you can store all of your code, you can see all of the queries that you've run in the past, and you can also see your output. For somebody who isn't necessarily thinking in terms of libraries and where inputs and outputs are stored, which is really kind of on top of learning everything else about code constructs at the start, I find that really kind of fried my brain, trying to think about where all these things were happening in my computer. It was another layer to have to consider.
Okay.
But having RStudio, which is incredible, is massively powerful. It's another massive kind of...
And it gets better
boom.
all the time.
It does,
Yeah.
yeah. They keep updating
Yeah.
it, which has pros and cons too. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about Python?
Python's easy to learn. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of free online tutorials, everything from the Python Foundation to there are a couple that are written specifically for journalists. And Google has a set of classes too. And so I find it really easy to get up and running with Python. I just was overwhelmed with all the materials I had. And there's a great community, so I go to the PyCon UK conferences, and there's just all these developers who are so eager to help and support. So it's like a wonderful community. And people who write Python, like software developers, are just so passionate about it, and they love the idea that journalists are using it. So they're like, yes, let us help you make the world a better place. It's great.
That is probably another thing that R gets criticized for quite a bit as
Okay.
well. Yeah. It can be difficult to learn at the outset,
Okay.
and that depends on your approach.
Okay.
I learned R from a statistician, somebody who worked in Bell Labs in the 70s and 80s. And so his background was very technical. And I was coming at it from, like having a specific problem, which was needing to know X for a top line in a story. And so his approach to teaching was very different. It was very much kind of, the syntax and the basics. And so I found it difficult to learn at the beginning. I found R quite tricky to get my head around to begin with, because I was very caught up with the kind of...
Writing it perfectly?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
rather than writing it to make it work.
Yeah, Python's just like go, just anyway, make it, hack it together. It's fine.
Yeah. But in ours camp, and actually probably in most programming languages,
Yeah,
right? I
yeah.
mean, this is the boon for all of them.
Yeah, this is why we do it.
It's reproducible, and hopefully, when you get to a certain stage, it's efficient.
Yeah, it should. Well, it should be.
It's not always.
Yeah, as long as you got the CPU power.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, R is reproducible in the sense that most coding languages are. Once you have a script, you can keep it, you can update it, you can rerun it, and that is massively useful. So if you have a project where you're going to be doing the same kind of task day in, day out, then this is when you want to move away from things like Excel. It's time to move on. Once you're doing tasks that are repetitive, and you find yourself doing it again and again, then it's time to kind of step up.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
It's really that point of like hitting their learning curve, right? So at the beginning, you really hit the wall with it. It takes a while, but then the benefits, you really start to reap the benefits after, I don't know, a couple, you get one script to work, and then you build on that. That's been my experience.
That's a good.
Yeah. I mean, one task I can point to recently where we would not really have been able to do the project in the Guardian newsroom without R. I say that because it was my code, but was the gender pay gap. So we just finished like a whole couple of weeks reporting on the gender pay gap in the UK. And the majority of it was based on our script. And the reason we had to do that was because the British government, had this fantastic new website that published the gender pay gap, the median hourly pay gap between men and women in businesses with more than 250 employees. But, it was a great website, it's a great idea, but they didn't make it very easy to use.
Yeah.
So I had a whole newsroom of reporters who wanted to do stories, but they couldn't find out what was most recently updated to the website because the government didn't think to create the website that way. So I wrote an R script for myself and my team that we could use every day, at any point in the day. And basically it was 3 lines of code. And what it would do is the first line would upload the code, upload the new data, the data that we had just downloaded that minute or that morning. It would compare it to yesterday's code and take out the new entries, and then it would write those new entries into a CSV file. And then I would just stick that in Google Drive, in Google Sheets, and just send it to like 20 reporters and say, these things look interesting. Get going.
Yeah,
So.
that stuff's just so handy.
Yeah,
That's
reproducible.
amazing. Yeah.
Anybody could do it, and it was efficient. It was 3 lines, and it was the basis of the project. Without it, we wouldn't have been able to do it.
Great.
So that's my cheer for R.
Go R. Python is powerful and fast. Yeah. It really is. So a couple of times I've fallen, I've come up against deadlines, and I have data sets that are just way too big for CSV. In one in particular, we're looking at ambulance data. So we were looking at all the different trusts, their response times. And it was like 25 million rows. There's no way. I mean, my CPU is barely handling that. But when I put that into Pandas and Jupyter Notebook, it was just a dream. All of a sudden, I could clean this thing. I mean, I couldn't even get it into, what's it called? Open Refine. It was crashing. It was just way too big. And so it really enabled me to do my job so that we could get out a great story. And if I hadn't had it, then our newsroom would have been like, well, we're just not reporting on ambulances this week. Yeah.
Can I ask you about Pandas and Jupyter Notebook? Are
Yeah.
you going to talk about that?
Sure, it's coming up. Yeah.
It's coming up.
Yeah.
Because I want to know a bit more, because I do get confused.
Okay.
And maybe there should be more, maybe I should be using Python sometimes for certain things.
I should use R probably more.
Well, another reason to use R. It's a Swiss Army knife for different data types. And this really goes back to what I was talking about at the start, with all those proprietary software data outputs that are really expensive and our newsroom is not necessarily going to buy because I have a hard time describing what I do the best of times. So trying to get them to spend thousands on a piece of software that, you know, it's very hard to explain the use case. But I find R to be probably the best, the most useful tool when it comes to having difficult data types.
Yeah.
So all of the SAS and SPSS outputs are a given. R now has added kind of ability to work with some SQL outputs as well. But what I use it for typically with really big data sets that our reporters are interested in looking at is combining data sets and then finding the interesting little bits that they want and throwing it back out to them in a Google spreadsheet. The things that we do that for are typically large government data sets. So say Companies House data. Companies House has started publishing loads of information either through an API programming interface or through CSVs that are just so big that there's no way that you can open them with, you know, with a regular, with Excel or anything else. So between Companies House and the Land Registry in the UK, there's, you know, because they now have a whole range of data relating to overseas property ownership. Without R in our newsroom, which is free, we just wouldn't be able to, we probably wouldn't be accessing it in the same way.
Okay. Yeah, so dates and times, the really fun part of programming. They're a nightmare, they're awful, and I spend so much time cleaning them. In Python, there's a really great library called datetime, and it allows me to convert like multiple different formats of dates into a standard one, and then I can like strip out data from it where I can convert it into seconds or hours or minutes or whatever I need, and then I can perform calculations on it. So this just is one of the things that makes my day a little bit better, that I know if I'm gonna get a CSV with all this crappy data and it's whole dates that are all over the place and times, and I can handle it. And you know, it gives me a bit of bolstering confidence.
Have you had to struggle with Excel data?
Oh God, I don't even go near it, because it's, you know, it'll start flipping it especially if you get an American CSV and you open it in a UK computer, it'll flip all the dates, and sometimes it gets it right, and then other times it gets it wrong, and so just because I worry about the integrity of the data, I'll just dump it into Python if I know I have to rely on these times.
And Excel has that horrible thing of, you know, once it thinks you've called it a date, it is a date forever.
Oh, I know.
R can do that too, but
okay.
On the broader topic. I mean, I use R for just about every step in my programming and my analysis now. But the key thing that R is really useful for, and it's the kind of capability around it being developed all the time, is data analysis. And let's be honest, that's, I mean, the processing in terms of getting the data, cleaning the data, is about 70% of the job before you even get to the analysis. But the analysis tools themselves are massively, massively useful. And they have come on leaps and bounds in the time that I've been an R programmer, so the past 5-6 years. So the developer who has made a lot of this possible is called Hadley Wickham, and he has developed a series of packages which there is amazing guidance and tutorials on in RStudio. And the main ones are things like dplyr and tidier, and there is one kind of universe of packages which allows you to clean all of the, kind of pull together all of these programs in one. It's called tidyverse. And that has really changed. This is just a game changer for data analysis in R. There are pros and cons to it.
Okay.
Because it changes the syntax. So the whole kind of, the process that Hadley Wickham has introduced into R analysis is very much based on, similar to Python really, where what you're typing in makes sense. You're saying things like, the packages are called things like dplyr, so it's like a plier for pulling data apart and then putting it back together again. Or you're summarizing things, or you're merging things, or you're doing an inner join or an outer join like SQL. So it's taking language and syntax from other parts of data analysis and introducing them into R. And for the real purists out there, that's problematic because, and this is the issue around open source programming, right? And open source software development, that it might start out with one syntax, with one kind of way of structuring. It's like the Old Testament and the New Testament. There was a way of doing things, and that's all there was.
Yeah.
And then somebody came along and developed something new.
Yeah.
And the new doesn't always match with the old. So that is an issue, but I think probably the data analysis packages that have come out have totally changed the accessibility of R and R Studio.
And I hear just people raving all the time about it, and at Nightcar, Hardly Wickham was like a rock star. Like, yeah.
I was almost kind of embarrassed for him. He had people who were lining up to get him to sign books.
Wow.
Yeah, that was kind of,
That's the data
it's real,
journalist
that's
community.
real nerdery right there. So.
Okay.
So one more for Python.
What do we got?
Pandas.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to plug this in.
Okay. So pandas, because R is so great with statistics, the Python folks wanted something like that. So pandas is a library that has been developed specifically to deal with statistics in Python. It uses a matrix, so it's a lot like looking at a spreadsheet. It allows me to kind of manipulate data, merge and reshape it. I can run pivot tables. I can do group bys. I get descriptive statistics really quickly, and it handles missing data really well. And so pandas is kind of really what allows me to do my job properly. It's really quick, and I can call all these statistical functions, and it's actually really good for cleaning data too. So this is just the Python community being like, R is so great, we want some of that, but we're not going to write R. Yeah. So really, we kind of copy them.
We can live with that.
Yeah.
How different does pandas look, right? Because it's very often you and I are teaching coding rather than talking about coding.
That's true. It actually looks a lot different to Python. I mean, it has its own syntax. It still uses a lot of English words like concatenate, things like that. But you learn Python and then you kind of learn pandas. While like you can dip in and out between, they are different, yeah. In a strange way, actually, pandas looks a little bit like SQL at times, in that you kind of string everything together rather than you write functions in just Python. So it is it's really quick and handy, and I recommend everybody go and have a look at it. Yeah. How are you doing? Okay. It is my hero. Yeah.
Okay, it's kind of broad. Another reason to love R is that I use it for visual analysis and development. And this again goes back to packages and development. So there is a package called ggplot2 where you can make a plot out of your data set with about 3 lines of code. You just tell it what you want to plot on the chart itself, and you give it your x-axis and your y-axis. And then you can get fancy. You can get fancy with your colors and your labels, and then sizing and the chart types. But really, it's 3 lines of code. That's it. And for the visual analysis purposes, that's really where I come in. I'm not a visuals developer. I'm not like a visual data journalist by any means. We've got amazing people at The Guardian who do that. So really, it's just for me to get an idea of identifying trends, and that's massively useful. But then I can also print that out, which sometimes our visuals people find pretty hilarious. When you come with like an A3 printed out thing of a ggplot spread. And it helps kind of inform the discussion around the development. So a lot of our gender pay gap visuals, so we did a couple of kind of long, kind of written through pieces with graphs of what we had found in the analysis. And that was basically because there were 3 lines of code that every day once we got the new data, we would just throw it in. We'd just throw the code in and see, was the trend in terms of the pay gap changing over time? So we were seeing in the very early days, the companies that were reporting pay gaps had typically smaller pay gaps.
Okay. So
it was actually the companies with the worst that held off to the end.
Okay.
They were hoping to get kind of lost in the mix, right? So there was 10,000 reporting and probably about, I think, over half of those reported in the last 10 days.
Okay.
So it was just a stampede. So it was really kind of trying to keep, you just can't have eyes on that, right? There's no way of doing that without visualizing it.
Yeah.
And so it helped kind of having just a couple of lines of code to see what the trend was in the companies that were reporting, helped inform our reporting, but also our visuals. So now, thankfully, I was working with two amazing visual developers in our team at The Guardian, Nico Commenda and Josh Holder. And because I work in R, they work in R a bit now as well.
Oh, that's great.
Which is brilliant.
You've got converts.
I've got converts.
Ah.
But I don't think I had much to do with that. I think that they just saw, they saw the light. And they just went for themselves.
Okay.
But that really changes things because you can kind of riff on one another's on one another's code, and you can develop it and build on it.
Yeah.
So
It's great
for
for collaborating.
me, yeah, exactly. It's more kind of, I don't know, code bonding, I guess.
Yeah.
But for me, it's for visual analysis and the development of the story. But for Josh and Nico, it's another world, right? So they're thinking towards what are we going to publish visually.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Cool.
Pandas.
Pandas cleans my data. It does. Pandas is absolutely fantastic for cleaning data. And when you have 10, 15, 20 million rows, being able to do really quick string replacements, to convert data types, to create new columns, reorder columns, to shape and merge things, removing unwanted characters like asterisks or pound signs, things like that, and renaming column headings. It's just a dream. Like, it just saves me so much time. And so, because like you said, like 70% of the job is just cleaning the data and checking it. I'm able to do that wonderfully with pandas. And I think I'd lose my mind if I tried to do it in Excel in sections. So it's a no-brainer.
One of the more recent developments with R is that you can make apps. So there is a development package in R called Shiny, and it allows you to make apps in the sense that we're talking lo-fi here.
Okay.
Lo-fi apps. So you could develop a visual with a button.
Okay.
And you can code that into the background. So you could say you want only to highlight, say on a chart, the outliers.
Okay.
And then you could click a button and say, I only want to see things that tend towards the mean.
Yeah.
So we don't use the Shiny apps development in our newsroom towards anything that's published on the front end. We might use it for kind of conversations between ourselves, between our team and visuals.
Yeah.
But we haven't really got to the stage where we're using it in any other form at the moment. But we'll see how that goes.
Okay.
But it's something that you can do. So if you're in a very small newsroom, again, by using this, which is free, you can have a conversation where you can show an editor what a project might look like and why you might want to show two variations on a chart. And this allows you to do that.
Sounds great. So Jupyter Notebook. Jupyter Notebook is amazing. It is an IDE. So it's a bit like RStudio, but it's a notebook that runs in your browser. And it's not just for Python, it works with loads of other languages. And so it has like little sections. So you can import your libraries and then you run it. And once you like upload your CSV, you can do like a df.head and then brackets, and it'll show you like immediately the bits of your code. It's pretty good. Before that, we were kind of running Python a lot through the command line. There was IPython, which was great, but this is completely interactive. You can run just sections of the notebook and not other bits. You can use matplotlib, and if you do inline, your charts will show up. So you can like clean data, do the analysis, and visualize it in one notebook that's stored. Then you can like upload it to GitHub. You can share it. Some newsrooms publish them now. And it just tells the story of your code. Like, it's just wonderful. The only issue I have with Jupyter is that it's not amazing on version control. So if you've got a big project, you can end up with like Jupyter Project 1, 1st of April, Jupyter Project 2, 2nd of April, rather than, proper.
And then 7 projects called final.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and then final master.
Don't call it final.
Yeah.
It's a kiss of death.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
Is it free?
Yeah,
Aha.
so everything Python's free. Like Pandas, Jupyter Notebook, everything's free.
I think that's massively useful, right? Because
Completely.
it's at the early stages where you want to develop,
Yeah.
but it's hard to argue the case for somebody to buy something.
Completely. And as well as that, Ben Welsh from the LA Times, who's just a general data hero, he has written this great tutorial on getting started with your first Pandas and Jupyter Notebook, which is online, and I can link out to anyone who wants it. Yeah.
I mean, there are many, many reasons, but I think we're coming towards the end. Another reason to love R is that you can gather data using APIs and scraping. So I teach R to journalists through the Centre for Investigative Journalism in London and a couple of other places. But when I started to teach, I was really just teaching data analysis and cleaning and kind of thinking about the story process.
Yeah.
But now that we have APIs in the UK to publicly accessible data sets,
Yeah.
so things like Companies House, Parliament databases, it kind of became imperative to have a real kind of go-to place for accessing APIs for me in the newsroom. And R was the logical place for me because it's what I was naturally comfortable in. And now I teach that as well. So it is useful for accessing APIs. I will say that one of the drawbacks is dealing with XML, but that's just dealing with XML.
Yeah.
So the output from a lot of these APIs, or if you're scraping down data as well, can be quite gnarly.
Okay.
Because you've got multiple tables stored within one another. So it's messy, basically. In short, it can be messy, but you can do it.
You can do it.
And you can do fancy things.
Oh.
So by fancy things, I mean like set timers. So you can set your code to go at a particular time. So say I want to scrape this website every day at 12 o'clock.
Okay.
Fancy things.
That's fancy.
Yep, and it's free. Did I say that already? Did I say it was free? No.
Okay. Python has hundreds of libraries because it's not just for statistics. You have, it's a back-end programming language. You've got databases. You have companies who their API is written in Python. You have academics use it for scientific analysis. You can create the most beautiful charts, and also there's machine learning. And so there's just hundreds and hundreds of fascinating libraries, and sometimes I feel a little bit like I'm in a candy shop or a sweet shop, and I'm just like picking them out and like trying out different stuff. So a couple of my favorites are, well, Pandas, Datetime, and then there's one called Bokeh, which is a visualization one. Seaborn as well, which is visualization, and it's like all rainbow and beautiful. Requests, which is a scraping one. NumPy, which is also statistical analysis. And then Beautiful Soup. I just love these things. Whoever wrote them, I'm just so grateful.
Can you tell us a bit more about Beautiful Soup?
Yeah, I mean, you use it for scraping, essentially, and you scrape down and then you get like these little bits of soup, and then you can like make it beautiful. Yeah, it's just a scraping thing.
What kind of soup? Information soup?
Yeah, it's information. The idea is like you're pulling it down. If you kind of think about like alphabet soup, where it's all just floating around, yeah.
Nice. You mentioned academics and statisticians.
Yeah.
And R has something called R Markdown, which is kind of really geared towards the academia world. But it's really useful for teaching, and it's really useful for explaining to people the process behind your code. So I comment like crazy, which drives people mad, but it helps me. So comment is basically describing what you're doing in the lines below. So very often I'll have like 3 lines of comment and then a line of code. Most of my code now is comment on a good day.
Yeah.
But the Markdown is really, really useful because you don't have to comment. You don't have to have all this kind of hashed out text. What you can do is output your code with the explanation in something that looks a little bit more pretty. So you can output it into something which is like a standard academic text. So it has like the academic format and fonts and and text font size as well. So it's targeted to academics to to publish all their research.
And you can share comments, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can share the comments in the text itself.
Okay.
So this has been really useful for me to teach. So to teach people how to understand what I'm doing rather than give people a load of commented notes
Yeah.
to take home with them. You can push it to your GitHub, or you can publish it anywhere, or hand it out in the class. But it means that people can read through and then also look at the code.
Okay.
So it's a really useful way of publishing, no matter what the publishing is going to be used for, because it's not, I mean, we're not academics. We're here to, most of the time we're here to do the job of storytelling, but sometimes we're also teaching, so, yeah.
Yeah, Python helps me learn about other languages. So before Pandas came along, I used to write my scripts in Sublime, like a text editor, Sublime or Atom, and then I would run them from the command line. And I was like, well, what's this command line thing? So then I started learning about command line tools, or commands, and how to navigate my system. I started understanding computers a little bit better. From there, I started wanting to learn a bit about version control. So I got myself a GitHub, and I started using Git. And I started using like little bits of bash commands. It really kind of gave me a lot of confidence. And I feel like I understand an awful lot more about computers now because of it. So it wasn't just like a little environment. It was my machine. And now I kind of feel a little bit more like bonded to my machine, because it's like I understand it better now.
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean about understanding the computer and the processes better. So it's not so alien anymore once because you kind of, you know what you think you know what the code is doing, then you actually know what the code is doing, and then you start to know where it's happening in the computer, and that feels like it makes sense. Yeah. It becomes easier, right?
It does.
Gets easier. Finally, a good reason is that, another reason to love R is that it's open source. Pros and cons to this are things that we've already talked about, right? So, I mean, the pros are that there are hundreds of packages that are out there, and they're being developed all the time.
Yeah.
So there will be developers out there who will look at very specific tasks to do with particular data sets, say in the US with the community survey. And they will write code specifically just for analyzing that piece of data. So the fact that it's open source means that there's people who can feed in with all their expertise, but it also means that you can be dealing with different types of packages from people with all sorts of different backgrounds. So when you're starting out, sometimes you feel that you understand, sometimes something will click with you. It'll be like, I get that. I understand that I understand that library, or I understand that package. But then when you move on to something else, it can feel completely alien again.
Okay, so you're starting from scratch a little bit sometimes?
Sometimes,
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Open source is great because
but you have Stack Overflow.
Free. Stack Overflow is the savior.
Just Google it.
That's true. That's very true.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably 60%.
Yeah, that's most of the code. Adapting other people's code and then Googling it. Yeah.
Or building on your own eventually.
Yeah.
But yeah, the fact that it's open source is great, but it also means that you will get multiple versions. So I looked the other day, and the version I had of R on my computer was from 2014.
Yeah.
So I hadn't really updated that.
Okay.
And when I did, it caused all sorts of problems. So, you know, it meant that like 3 hours out of my day was just trying to work around stuff. Yeah. So that is a pain, but
that's every programming language as well.
Yeah. And that's part of the fact that it's, did I say it's free?
Yeah, it's free.
Okay. That's Python.
So I know this sounds a little bit philosophical, but in a weird way, I sometimes feel like Python makes me a bit of a better person. Because rather than just like getting data, making a copy, and just like rushing in and like poking about in it and stuff, I kind of have to take a breath, and I sit down and I'm like, okay, I'm going to be writing a script here. So let me write down the things I want to do and the steps I'm going to go through, because what do I want from this? Am I going to spend this time writing this code and it's just for me and it's just once? Or is this, who's going to read this? Are we going to do some really interesting analysis from this, and maybe we get a high court judgment or something and I have to show it to a judge? Like, what do I do? Or if my colleagues are going to run it? Or what happens if in whatever years I leave and someone else has my code? Because this isn't just mine, it's my Newsroom's. So it kind of makes me be more thoughtful about what I'm doing and how can I be kind to the people I'm working with.
So kind in terms of explaining what you're doing.
Yeah, considerate, writing more comments, writing proper documentation, version control.
Do you think that's something to do with the fact that it's more difficult than point and click with things like Excel or to some degree SQL?
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, basically, to my mind, getting started was one of the biggest difficulties. I mean, there are loads of reasons to love R.
Yeah.
And I mean, Python is
pretty much the
amazing
same
as well.
reasons.
Yeah, pretty much the same reasons.
Just pick one.
It's kind of about getting started, I think.
Yeah.
That for me has been the biggest difficulty.
Yeah.
I had a project, well, I had multiple projects. Like I said, I learned from a statistician, and then I kind of had to unlearn and relearn it for specific processes.
Yeah.
But it is having a project, having one specific goal and task to work on, and just pursuing that, I find to be the best way to learn.
Okay.
How about you?
When I started, I was, troubleshooting any usual issues, and I stuck with Python because I liked it, but also I went to PyCar and NiCar, and it just really got me moving on it. And all of a sudden, something really clicked, and I have friends who are software developers and who write Python, and so I could just send a text message to someone when I'm like, okay, I spent 2 hours trying to figure this out. What am I doing wrong? So a mixture of community, which is so important, and there's so many different types of community out there. And there's the NiCar listserv, and there's I think the Lonely Coders Club on Slack as well, the News Nerdery on Slack, and there's loads of places to help. But that's just get yourself up and running. But yeah, definitely start with a project.
I think probably most of my time at the start of learning how to code was just pure frustration.
Yeah.
What about you?
There was a lot of beer.
A lot of beer?
Yeah. There's a lot
While
of
coding or
Yeah. There's a lot of late night, why am I doing this to myself?
Is it worth it?
Oh yeah, it's amazing.
I think it was
it's like a superpower. It's great.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of it was definite frustration,
Yeah.
Stack Overflowing the hell out of things.
Yeah.
And then just cherry picking pieces of other people's code to make mine work.
Yeah.
And I still do that.
Yeah. I often just look at GitHub of these beautiful scripts written by other people and be like, why can't I do that?
But you will someday.
Maybe we'll get there.
I still have imposter syndrome.
Oh yeah, I don't know if that ever goes away though.
Why do you think that?
Because the internet is so vast and there's just so much you can do at code. I just look at web pages and companies and systems so differently now, and it's just strung together with sweat, blood, and peanut butter. It's all magic.
I think I have imposter syndrome around code because I know I can make it work.
Yeah.
But 7 times out of 10, it won't work first time.
I know.
So, it's still a real process of trial and error. And I think at the start, that's the really hard bit to get over because you're I'm never going to make this work. And you just feel kind of embarrassed that it's not working.
Yeah.
That was my experience anyway.
Coding humbles you.
Yeah, it's the more you learn,
Yeah.
the more you realize you know nothing at all.
Nothing at all.
Nothing.
Yeah.
But it's still
awesome.
amazing.
Yeah.
You should definitely learn how to use R.
Yeah.
Or Python.
Or Python. Do anybody have any questions? Hi.
There's a mic coming.
Yeah.
Then we will release you all because I'm aware that you are listening to 2 Irish women babbling on about code in a basement on a Friday evening.
Hi. I have learned and used both R and Python.
Uh-huh.
I tried not to use either R or Python for some few months just because I found the other one better.
Okay.
But there was some reason that I had to come back to both of them at some point. So even today, I still use and still learn.
Okay.
The point I wanted to, there are many points I want to talk, but it will take a lot of time. But one question I wanted to ask regarding the 7 out of 10 times situation. So the error part, when you try to find the error, how do you compare R or Python in error handling? In the sense, you want to fix something and you want to find the root cause. Where do you find the advantage? Is it R or Python?
Well,
You can go. So R has a couple of different ways where you can trace back on your errors. The kind of standard feedback for errors is really not helpful, especially for a learner, because very often most of the code is lowercase, but there are a few real essential points where it has to have one uppercase letter, which is just would drive you crazy. So it's the point where you think this should work, why is it not working? And it will not give you proper feedback as to what the problem is. But there are pieces of code that you can put at the beginning of your script that encourages the error messages to be more verbose. So it gives you a longer description of what the problem is. And that is really useful when you're beginning to learn, as long as you don't mind a big blah of red text on your screen. The other thing that I find useful for errors is the traceback function. So the traceback function is like a debugging function that RStudio has built in as well, and allows you to step back and it'll point exactly to what it perceives as the error in the code. So those are both very useful. And last but not least, Stack Overflow.
Yeah, Stack Overflow.
Etc.
In Python as well, there's the traceback thing, so it'll tell you what line it is, and it'll give you like cannot parse whatever, and it'll kind of show you a little bit. There's also, I'm trying to think, there's also a library called PyFlakes. So you can run it over your code and it'll like rate it and tell you which bits are good and which bits are bad. I'm not at the point where I really use it, but like I know a lot of Python developers use it pretty regularly. And it like it rates your code and says where you can make it more efficient and stuff, but Stack Overflow, to be honest, yeah.
All right, so first of all, thank you so much. Such an inspiration you are. And I feel like I want to go home and learn how to code right now.
Yay!
I don't care about parties anymore tonight. I want to go and learn how to code. But I feel like it's such a jump from Excel to coding. So I want to ask you, what is your favorite resource for beginners? You said that you have something in mind, like you have a favorite tool, a favorite tutorial. Like, can you point us to something we can start with?
So there is my first Jupyter notebook by Ben Welsh. And that's if you actually go to Chris Wu blog, she's this awesome lady, and she kind of gets all the resources from NICAR each year, which is a computer-assisted reporting conference in the US each year. It's like the world's biggest data journalism conference. And she puts all the resources there, and there's so many different tutorials for Python and R, and it's just a really good place to go and have a look. So they go back, there's 2018 is up there, but it'll go back to 2017, 16, 15. So you can actually see how the tutorials change over time as there's new kind of developments. So, yeah.
Can you tweet it afterwards?
I will. Yes. I'll tweet it.
I mean, Chris Wu's resources are fantastic.
Yeah.
Anything that NICAR has is great as well. And there's more and more journalists teaching R as more, it's a kind of process because people take a couple of years to use it in their newsroom, and then you figure out what's useful, and then you start teaching it. So as more and more people teach, it gets better.
Yeah.
I have a lot of stuff on my GitHub that I teach, and there is absolutely no reason that you couldn't just follow it along because I comment like crazy. So you could just download it and use it. I think having that thing of having a project, or even having like a tiny project that's not on deadline for yourself.
Just a small task, like even like merging two CSVs together.
Definitely, hugely useful.
Yeah.
Because if you can do it with 2 CSVs of 10 lines of code, you can do it with 2 CSVs with 30 million lines.
Yeah.
There's no, it's the same concept, but it's like starting small, breaking it down to the constituent parts.
Build your foundations.
And then building on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No problem.
Yeah. Just to second that, thanks. This has been a really great talk. What I wondered was, is there much Newsroom support when it comes to learning how to actually code? Or if you come in as a basic coder who's done some tutorials?
No.
We work in, I mean, you've worked in a couple of
Yeah,
newsrooms, really.
I worked in a couple. Probably for me, the most supportive was when I was at the Times and Sunday Times working on the data team, because we have this editor at the time called Megan Lucero, and she was just so into code and really promoted it, and just was like, if you need to take time and your project's going to take a little bit longer, just because you're learning how to do this programming, fine, go for it. She was wonderful, and she really was inspiring. Generally, newsrooms, not really, because they don't really know what it is. They don't really get why it's useful. And you kind of have to show them why they're going to get more from it.
That the long road is the worthy one sometimes.
Completely.
Yeah, I agree with everything you've just said, absolutely. I mean, with us, we're kind of the anomaly in the newsroom because we don't have a Mac. Because
Okay.
we have PCs, because they're more powerful. And we don't have any direct IT support for that, so any
Yeah.
problems, we've got to fix them ourselves. But that's actually,
Yeah.
it's a hard place, but actually you kind of learn everything you need to know
Yeah.
as you go, because it's got to work. But what I will say is that sometimes in newsrooms we overlook the resources that are within our organizations more broadly. So when I started at The Guardian 3 years ago, we haven't successfully done it so much recently, but we have meetups where we will get people from what was then the DigDev community. So all the developers who are doing the back-end development for our site. And these are people who are really passionate about the cause of working in a newsroom as well, but they're working on in a different area, but they're there for a reason, because they're developers, and if they really wanted just a code, they could go somewhere and get paid a lot more, right? So they're in a newsroom because they believe in the cause. They believe in using journalism for the betterment of society in general. So they are your advocates. They might not have the same kind of thought process when it comes to what should code do.
No.
So for me, a lot of the time, it's like, oh, it looks awful, but it does the trick, that'll do.
Yes.
Like at the start, it's kind of, it doesn't have to be beautiful, it doesn't have to do everything, it's
But
just
it
got
has
to
to
get
be
the job
accurate.
done. Yeah.
And that's the only one word of warning. Like, developers are wonderful people, but they want it to kind of be stylistic and perfect. And they're like, oh, it 95% works. I mean, developers said that to me, and I'm like, yeah, that 5% is libel. So let's keep working on this.
Yeah. Let's get that down to zero.
Yeah.
So there are people in your newsroom who have the skills, they just use it towards a different end.
Yeah.
So find those people. I would say, like, find them and work with them.
Make friends with developers.
We've had a couple, it's very few, but we've had a couple of developers who've worked on the back end of the site who've come then to work in the newsroom.
Oh, yeah.
Probably about 3 or 4, but that's a real process as well, because sometimes as journalists, I think we take for granted, because we're surrounded by other journalists, what the kind of aims and ambitions and drives of telling stories are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a much more of a soft skill. It's kind of something that you learn and you hone over time.
Yeah.
So, but those people are so valuable.
Yeah.
They're so valuable
They're
to
great.
your newsroom and the news organization in general.
Yeah.
And I think they too often get overlooked.
They do.
I think there's a final question
Yeah.
down at the front.
Thank you. Does it make any sense to try to be bilingual in both languages? And if so, should you try to learn one well first, or is it better to kind of grow up bilingual?
I actually am not sure. I mean, I would maybe pick one, because once you know one programming language, it's so easy to pick up another. So like when you teach R, I kind of coach for you, and I don't really write R, but I'm able to figure it out.
Yeah.
So it just kind of comes really quickly. So maybe pick one to start with, just to get the basics, because if it's hard enough learning how to do something once, but when you've got 2 different things in your head, and also one of the differences between Python and R is that in Python you start counting from 0, in R it's 1, and just to have things clear in your head so you don't get mixed up.
I would stick with 1 to begin with as well. I mean, it depends on your background. I guess
Yeah.
if you've already got programming languages under your belt, because it's a mindset, right? It's kind of like, it's that way of approaching something logically and breaking down the component parts of it and then building it back up.
Yeah.
Once you kind of get your head around that, then I think you can adapt it to many other things, like any language.
Yeah.
But I don't know, it's probably like learning Spanish and Portuguese at the same
Yeah.
time, aged 30 rather than aged 2. I think you're going to mix things up a bit more, but
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe that's, I mean, I have a degree in philosophy. Let me
I'm a
remind you
medievalist.
that,
Yeah.
you know, so like it's not my background.
Yeah.
But I feel as a non-developer, one language at a time for me is,
Yeah.
I'm happy with that.
Me too. Okay. Thank you for
Call
coming.
it a day. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.